Okay, so I have a question to ask you
Sure.
before we get going.
All right.
And you're a baseball guy.
I am.
So I'm watching the first four innings of the Jays and the Yanks, and Cole's pitching lights out, and
Yep.
Barrios is pitching pretty goddamn good.
Yep.
And then he throws a fucking fastball to Judge, and Judge deposits it. You know, it's a it's a big game for the Jays, but like, what the hell? Stay away from them, no?
Yeah, I don't know why they pitched to Judge. I mean, they need 3 wins to clinch a wild card spot. They haven't scored a run against the Yankees, who are going to miss the playoffs. They haven't. They didn't score against them last night, and they're being shut out tonight as well. And they need 3 wins. They play Tampa at home the last 3 games, and Tampa doesn't need the wins per se to make the playoffs, but they do want to catch Baltimore. So there's just a lot of, and Baltimore ends the season with at home on the road actually with the Red Sox. So you know, uh, their teams will be hungry. I don't know why they pitched to Judge. Barrios, I don't know why they started him against the Yankees. I know there's a rotation and everything else, but Barrios is he has their number. I mean, he has their number more than Greg Millen had the Leafs number when he was with St. Louis in the mid '80s. I mean, he stumped them pretty good. Actually, Wamsley rather, and I just don't know why they started him, but they haven't. They should have won. The Blue Jays should have won last night. The Yankees pulled it out of their ass in the ninth inning, but I don't know. It's almost like pitching and defense is the Blue Jays' uh, foundation this year. They don't hit. None of the teams hit. If the Yankees hit, they'd be in the playoffs. If the Blue Jays hit, they'd be in first. But I don't know. I don't know why you would pitch to Judge. If your season is on the line, why are you pitching to Judge? It's asinine.
And see, I'm sitting here saying to myself, like, I don't know the coaching side, but I say to my wife,
Right.
are you kidding? Like, pitch around him, put him on,
Yep.
whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just,
It's like they're playing to lose or they're playing for par. You can't do that. He's a game breaker. You know, it's asinine. It's asinine.
yeah. So
But
this Constantine thing that we talked about the other day,
sure.
it now looks like they're saying it was a racial slur. These
Mm.
things are so, they're tight, man. Like, any little thing could be considered that now. Not to under overmind it or whatever, but I think the society's become a little touchy.
Yeah, I haven't. We haven't heard anything in the states about the about Kevin, but you know, there's a precedent, right? I mean, um, uh, Bill Peters recently was rehired, and you know, is that good for the game? Is that bad for the game? My issue is, and I've always felt this, is there has to be some sort of, and I know that it differs in each situation, but my thing is that if it happens then, you know, there's no statute of limitations, but where have you been? It's like I can understand if you're a kid. I can understand if you're afraid, but it's after the fact, say something. You know, I give and they're not related, but I give Paul all the credit in the world for calling out Babcock for this horrible situation that happened in Columbus. But it's a voice that needed to be heard, and it was right away. It didn't linger through the whole season. Some people didn't hear about the Marner incident. Some didn't hear about the rookie incident in Anaheim. Commodore was screaming from the rooftops, but you know, uh, it is what it is, and it's whatever the media can latch onto. Of course, if he did all these things and said them, he should be punished. But at the same time, I'm glad that they nipped it in the bud right away rather than, oh, 4 years ago, this guy said something mean. I mean, come on. I mean, say it now. I mean, it'll help you more to say it rather than not.
Yeah.
And
I feel for today's coach in a way that they're gonna have to literally toe such a line
right,
because the majority of the guys, especially hockey players, are really fun, open-minded sort of guys. I mean, I've been in dressing rooms, so if you've heard the language, the talk, the way it goes on, it's things that happen in those rooms are certainly much different than society. But
yep,
I feel bad. I hope this happened recent and this isn't. In 1997, Kevin Constantine said X.
yeah, yeah,
In a strange way, I hope it's recent.
right, right. That's how I feel. I get it that there's pressure on a kid, or he has no one to turn to. But my argument for that is nowadays with social media, it is your friend before it is your enemy when it comes to certain situations, and I think this is one of them. So my thing is that it's dealt with, it's it's cleared up, and people can move on, and there's a resolution.
Yeah,
So
well, it's still under investigation, so we'll see.
right,
Now, almost sticking to the baseball theme, you'd like
all
this
right.
in Canada. Uh, Marner, Matthews, Nylander went to batting practice today for the Jays earlier on, and Matthews hit a dinger.
Oh yeah. Oh
Left-hander,
yeah.
left-handed hitter, boom, out.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, growing up in Connecticut, everybody had heard of Tom Glavine, who was drafted by the Kings but grew up a Boston kid. Brian Leach graduated high school the same year I did. He was the number two pitcher at Avon Old Farms. A lot of people don't know that. He had a 90-mile-an-hour heater.
Really?
And and Juan Nieves, the gentleman that threw a no hitter for Milwaukee, was the number one pitcher. Um, there's a lot of, it's funny. Nobody thinks of the hockey baseball crossover. Kirk McCaskill he was from, I think he was drafted by Winnipeg. He was a baseball pitcher here in Anaheim during I think the 80s and early 90s. But the biggest one was Gordie Howe used to take batting practice frequently with the Detroit Tigers, and Al Kaline was one of his best buddies. So it's it's ironic that baseball and hockey have meshed together. Of course, Dave Winfield, who is a Hall of Famer in baseball, he was drafted in 7 different leagues for both all three: football, basketball, and hockey. Um,
Wow.
uh,
Deion
yep,
Sanders.
Deion Sanders as well. He was a Yankee. He was a Yankee farmhand in Albany Colony, New York, when I was at Hudson Valley. Um, it's just it's an amazing crossover with baseball and hockey with the hand-eye coordination and
Yeah, and 100% watching Austin Matthews, hit that homer,
oh yeah,
and he played baseball in Arizona growing up. His hand eye was like,
yeah, yeah. There's it's funny. You think about the goaltenders that grew up in Europe. They didn't play baseball. It's just not popular sport over there. And you look at particularly an American goaltender, but hockey in Canada as well as baseball with the goaltending, the hand eye to catch a puck. Dominik Hasek was, one of the best to ever play, but his the way he would catch a puck, it was nothing like catching a baseball. And you take an American or a Canadian kid, they have that hand eye to catch a ball and a puck. So it's to me, it's a pretty big deal. Whenever I see a European goaltender, I do think of that, and I think that I don't think that I'm that far off with that. I'm not saying that their glove skills are horrible overseas. I'm just saying that if they played a different sport once in a while, that hand eye is pretty quick, and it's
it kind of leads me to think about how a lot of Canadian kids, and I'm sure in America as well, they're
yeah,
doing year round hockey, which I think you need a break.
yep,
And either that break constitutes doing nothing, or if you pick up a lacrosse stick or a baseball glove or whatever, and just do something else for a few months. I know the players I represented,
right,
and when I coached, I didn't want to see them go 12 months of the year the way a lot of kids are doing nowadays. But I don't know.
right,
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a proof in study that going 12 months, year round in the
right.
training, maybe it works. Like maybe Bedard
Well,
does that. I don't know.
well, growing up in Connecticut, you could not play baseball year round because of the snow. And one of my baseball coaches told me, and I'll never forget it. He said, "I'm glad that the kids don't play baseball year round." And I overheard him saying this to my mother, and what would happen is your body grows. So if you think about it, if you're a squirt or a peewee and you play year round, your body grows, obviously, but your body never gets a chance to adjust. Like you still play the game as a squirt and a peewee, in that blind tunnel instead of, you put the game down for a few months and you go and pick it back up and you realize, hey, look, I had a growth spurt and this is what happened. I put hockey down. I hurt my back my sophomore year in high school and I stopped playing in February. And when I went back in the fall, I had grown 3 inches, it seemed, over the summer and I was a different goaltender at that time, and that's when I decided to play forward. But my body had grown so much. Like I looked down at my goalie equipment, and it was all too small. And I realized then that that your body has to have a chance to grow, and then you have to learn your body. Everybody's says, "Oh, wait till he fills out, wait till he grows into his body." But that's a huge thing that happened to me. And the other thing is, not a lot of people know this either, but Don Cherry, of all people, I know we spoke about him a few days ago. He made the Bruins. He filled in for one playoff game, and he had a cup of coffee, and he went back home to Kingston, and he was playing baseball. And he said, "Well, I'm just going to stay in the outfield and avoid, the collisions at second base and whatnot." And he dove for a ball, and he separated his shoulder. And then, worse yet, it needed surgery. And he should have had the surgery and then stayed off of it, but he didn't. And he should have showed up to camp late, and instead it snowballed, and he never recovered. That was the only NHL game he ever played in the NHL. Was right before he.
I've never heard that story.
Yep, and that is the truth. And I'll tell you, when I read his book, I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" Like how, like baseball took away Don Cherry. So it's funny that we're sitting there saying, "Oh, you got to go do something else." And I know Gretzky played box lacrosse and all that other fun stuff, but because Don Cherry didn't know how to dive for a ball. It really, I hate that I'm not, he may have a difference of opinion, but reading his book, it literally cost him his NHL career. He would have been the number 5 or 6 Bruin defenseman had he been healthy reporting to camp. And he wasn't. He wasn't healthy at all. He kept thinking about his teammates who were busy training and they were going to leapfrog ahead of him. And that was it. And
He was built like a shit brick house, Jerry.
oh yeah, oh yeah. His book,
I know though. I'll tell you, like I seen it firsthand. I felt it work for Sheldon Key, for Mike Danton, John Erskine, a bunch of guys I coached.
sure,
But my own kid, in the reverse, was playing baseball out in California, and he was playing year round because, of course, you can.
yep,
And it burnt him out, and his arms started to get because he was pitching. And
yep,
he wasn't just playing little league. He had moved up to travel, as you know. So
yep.
it was more high end, big games, and he burnt out, and his arm burnt out.
It is surprising how many little league, senior little league, and high school kids out here have Tommy John surgery. I can't fathom that. Tommy John himself, who grew up in upstate New York, said, "You got to play other sports. You have to give your arm a chance to to heal in the growth. I mean, you just can't go at it like I said earlier. Your body has to have a chance to grow without any pressure put on it, and that ligament is something. Otani is going to have his second Tommy John before all is said and done, and it is a career ender if your body doesn't bounce back. But and I know your son was a lefty, so of course any coach that saw him, drooled all over that. Oh my God, a left-handed pitcher! I gotta have that kid.
Yeah.
And they it's funny the kids never got a break that play here year round. I feel sorry for the kid that plays hockey year round. I think they should play a spring, a spring league and get your legs underneath you and get the wind up, and then maybe a 2 week summer camp. But enjoy your summer and enjoy your body being able to recuperate. I mean, football players often say every game is like a car accident. No matter what happens, it's some sort of car accident, and your body has to have 7 days to recover. And that's why the players union bitches and moans when they play a Thursday game after a Sunday and a Monday game, and then they don't have enough time to recover for the next week. And that's why they instituted the bye week, and that's why they only play 17 games a year. The owners would play 50 games a year if they could get away with it with the money that they bring in,
Yeah.
but the
Well,
bodies would never take it.
It's funny you say that because if you relate it to hockey, it's probably why there's so many goddamn boring games, you know,
Yep.
during the lull of the mid-season. It's because guys are starting to, their bodies are breaking down. They're mailing it in a lot of nights,
Right.
and it takes away from the competitiveness of the game. Like, why are playoffs so much better? Because guys give a shit,
Right.
and their give a shit meter goes way up, and everybody is wants to win and is pushing and
Yep.
battling for every loose puck. It's a problem. It's
Yep.
football's on to something first, obviously.
Yep. I always think that the hockey season is a marathon and the playoffs are a sprint. But now with 2 and 3 days off in between games, and very rarely does a series go 7 games. So you've got some extra time to, a team either gets too much time off or not enough time off in the NHL playoffs. But they need to do something. My biggest thing is it's the salary cap, and you know that I'm a capologist, but it's the goaltending, and the whole that we could do a whole show about my theory on the cap, but
Well, for
each team,
Gary's cap
yeah, it's
has
Gary's cap.
yeah, it's Gary's cap. Gary's cap has undoubtedly slowed marketability of the game. Where
Yep.
think about just before that, St. Louis, Detroit, Toronto, all the big wheel Rangers. Everyone was their payrolls were rate max. It was great. Guys
Yep.
were making legit trades, huge maneuvers. I find the game it lacks punch because of the cap.
Yep.
And Gary will say, "Well, the cap's working." No, it's not working.
It's the opposite effect. My theory with the cap, I have so many different theories, but I have two major ones. Is that there should not be a goalie cap. You should be able to dress or at least have called up on a guy in the. It'll take away the e-bug, but you have a guy in the studio or back in the weight room lifting weights or doing TV work or something like that, or he's up in the perch, and that's your third string goalie. And then you have your starter and obviously the one on the bench. But you really need three goalies in this day and age just to give the two a breather and get them off the ice for practice. And then the other thing that is huge to me about the salary cap is you can make whatever trades you want at the deadline and add as much salary as you want, but you have to match it with a certain percentage that goes into the Players Association. And why it doesn't go to the owners is because I know that they get the playoff money, and the players would then have a little bit of an odd or extra income, and that would only go for players that are on expiring contracts. And the reason why I also say that is then you're going to be moving minor league players up to the NHL to fill those lower echelon clubs that just traded away their money, and it gives more players more games toward their service time, and it just seems like a win-win. But of course, when it comes to Gary, he's not into the double win. It's got to be a win for the owners, and
And
it's
the other
horrible.
thing, goaltending as for the salary cap would be if they weren't a part of the overall number, you could pay your number one what they're worth, and then B, the whole controlling of the system would really go forward for the players, the goalies to be making 6 to 8 million. Your number one would, and it doesn't count against the team cap. I've heard that talked about, but of course, it goes back in a circle to Gary and wanting to control because he doesn't want it to get out of hand on his watch. And I don't even know if that's the right word, out of hand. I think it needs to be higher so there's more excitement. You can have. It goes back to the conversation on does your general manager know what he's doing? Well, if he does, he's going to build a good 4-line, strong defense team. And he won't spend like a drunken sailor. But you can make up for some injuries and or mistakes with a bigger, larger cap. There's no question. Hockey was better to watch. It was much more entertaining before the cap.
Absolutely. Other things that if you want to, we could talk about the cap for a little bit. My other thing is you can have a homegrown guy. So you take a guy like Marner or Matthews, and when I mean homegrown, it's a player that you drafted, not someone that you traded for and before they played an NHL game, but a homegrown drafted player. And the issue is that so many times the teams, they look around and they're priced out of it. Like they just can't afford him because their money is allocated somewhere else. I think you should be allowed to have a homegrown player. You could pay him as much as you want because he is the face of your franchise. And if that's who you designate that year, then that salary also does not go against the cap. And you can also sign a free agent during the summer that also does not go against your cap. So if you sign it's got to be an unrestricted free agent, nothing with a restricted, but an unrestricted free agent over a certain amount of money doesn't go against your cap. And you can also take the median and the mode, which is you add all the salaries together of the franchise and the free agent. And I know this gets a little technical, but whatever the average is, whatever the over average is, that money also goes into the Players Association.
See,
Because
Gary right away would set off alarm bells. Cap circumvention. Cap circumvention.
Yep.
And
well, that would, yep. Go ahead.
It would make the game better to have that.
Yeah. Yep. It's a simple fix, and the owners will sit there and cry and moan and bitch about overpaying and everything else. Well, those are your funds being overpaid. So it's not a theory of, I've got to pay this guy $15 million. Eventually, it doesn't come to that. I've always also thought about that a certain player can only make a certain amount of money, but I really feel bad because you can't turn to somebody and say, look, you're only going to make $8 million or $12 million. I mean, you take Connor McDavid and you say, look, you can't maximize your income because everything is capped. I think that would be wrong, but there's so many different ways to keep players in the cities where they love. But getting to the restricted free agents, there are two out here that are the Ducks are in some trouble, and it's Drysdale and Zegras, and they're nickel and diming them, and the Ducks have more cap space than the cap.
So what's behind that?
So it's generally never the owner when it comes to the Ducks, when it comes to this sort of thing, because he overpaid for Perry and Getzlaf for long-term deals and for Timu as well.
Oh, Korea, everyone, all their big deals.
Yep. So the biggest thing I can think of is there something amiss with the Ducks? There's something missing with Verbeek. I think he's had I hate to say it like this because he's a former Whaler, and I love Pat Verbeek, but he has had I want to know who the real Pat Verbeek is. He missed on Fantilli, and he picked Carlson, and I want to say that the Carlson guy is a former teammate's nephew that when he was with the Devils, for crying out loud. At least I think. I'm trying to remember on that's strictly on memory. But my thing with Pat Verbeek is, how do you miss on a draft? And then how do you turn around and you sign Killorn for a boatload of cash? Your team is nowhere near contending. If they're 2 to 3 years away from a playoff spot, why on earth would you sign somebody at that term and length and
he'll
money?
Be long gone before they turn a corner.
Oh yeah. I just can't get over that. And then why would you keep Gibson when he'll never be higher than he is right now. They had an opportunity. You had desperate clubs in the Leafs, the Oilers, the Devils, all the Penguins, all desperate for goaltending. They are desperate for a goaltender. And they didn't move Gibson, and they would have gotten a boatload back. It would have helped them out. They probably would have turned that corner had they pulled that trigger. They did not. And they're going to go into the season without a captain. They have a first-year coach that's never coached in the National Hockey League, and he's more of a teacher than he is a coach. And I'm not putting the guy down. He went to Colby in Maine, so he's got a brain between his ears. But my goodness, what is going on? And I'm looking to the north, which is Anaheim, and I cannot believe what's going on the 57 between the Ducks and the Angels. But the Angels are a whole different other ball of mess. But I cannot believe what Pat Verbeek has done that is definitely not the Steve Yzerman way that, everybody's got the Yzer plan and everything else. It's not here. It's not with Pat Verbeek. And I don't know if he's trying to make, a name for himself just to draw up interest or spark some anger or whatever. But he has had a horrible, horrible summer. And I just cannot get over it. And there was one other thing that he did in the spring. He didn't trade Shattenkirk. He let the expiring veterans play out their contracts in Anaheim, and they were well out of a playoff spot. They were well out of a playoff spot in January. They should have moved those players and gotten something, anything, an 8th round pick in a 7th-round draft. Give me something. And I'm disappointed. I'm really, and I'm looking at a Whaler logo while I'm talking, but I'm disappointed. I really thought there would be some sort of push, and there wasn't. And it's mind-boggling what he's done. And okay, that rant.
he will have bought himself probably 5 years, and then they'll really judge him.
Well, that's the other thing is that the owners they don't fire people. Burke left on his own. They kept Bob Murray in the general manager seat probably 2 or 3 years too long. They kept Dallas Eakins on. They let him twist in the wind most of last season. Carlisle has been here twice. They love him. He still does some scouting for the Ducks. I saw him in San Diego a few years ago, and that's fine and dandy. But I just cannot. If he's bought himself 5 years, I don't know why on earth he had to. He found there was another free agent signing that he had as well, but the Killorn. I mean, are you kidding me? He's not a needle mover. He's a big burly winger. He scores goals. He's a great teammate. He's somebody to have on your second and third line, if you're a playoff team, but I just don't see it. But the other issue is Zegras. It's like he got to the NHL and he hasn't really done anything. I mean, he scored 22 goals last year, and they're telling him he's the number one center, but they're not paying him like he's the number one center. But my biggest thing is
down there. Is there a lot of?
No, it's getting a lot of chatter on social media locally, but I don't know. I don't think I don't think
kid in Toronto.
That kid in Toronto would be dynamite, but it's a lot like
story right now.
Front page. I mean, can you imagine Zegras? And he's a restricted free agent, so anybody can sign him. And they're talking about $3 or $4 million a year for Zegras. He would sign for $4 million in Toronto, or his. I know he's a Ranger fan. He could go home. He'd be a legend on Broadway, but they don't have the room.
I heard a guy on one of the networks suggest a Nylander for Zegras.
That would be interesting. that would be interesting. I would not put that past anyone.
I got a lot of respect. I used to be a huge Nylander, get him out of town, but I've got a lot of respect for the way he shows up in playoffs.
I love Nylander. If he wants to be in Toronto so bad and he wants $10 million and the Leafs are offering $9 million, I'm almost tempted to look at the guy and just say, split the difference. I mean, we're talking about $500,000. You could jettison Connor Timmins, for crying out loud, who you never should have signed in the first place 2 years ago. But it's embarrassing. They're squibbling over literally $1 million.
What they're trying to do, what I'm hearing, is they're trying to phase Tavares out, get rid of that salary, and sort of. I mean, the whole center thing, moving him in training camp, they're trying to build the next John Tavares to fit that second line center slot.
Right.
That's basically what this is all about. I mean, if he proves it, they'll keep him there. He'll get his money. Tavares will either sign for peanuts and stay, or he'll be out of town. But I don't think they want to lose him unless they made a major move for another second line center.
You know, with the money that Nylander is making this year and the money that the Ducks are offering for the money the Ducks are offering Drysdale and Zegras, could you imagine if they packaged both of them for Nylander and a first? I mean, I would do that in a second, and they can take back Connor Timmins and, you know, maybe TJ Brody. I mean, I hate to pile on TJ Brody, but he's in the last year of his contract, and the Ducks could flip him for a chip, you know, unless they wanted to make that push for the 12th spot in the Western Conference in March,
Yeah, see,
which is just asinine.
Connor Timmins scored tonight, and all the tree huggers will be like, "Oh, what a great sight!" But the truth is, those guys fizzle out when it.
Yep.
I mean, I really like the move of Domi. He adds grit. Forget about his dad and all. I don't think that really means anything. I think it matters how he plays. And I think he will add an element of grit, and he's determined. He keeps himself in really good shape.
Yeah.
And because his dad played, he's got experience in Toronto. I don't think the pressure, but the Bertuzzi can really work in their favor. I thought Tree Living made a really astute signing there.
Dave, are you watching? You're watching preseason games?
I kind of got one eye on it. Well, my Jays are getting killed by your Yankees, so.
Oh, well, I can't help that. I mean, they're pitching to Judge. So I as a former season ticket holder of the Lightning and the Leafs, or pardon me, the Lightning and the Whalers, and the Albany River Rats, who I know that you know intimately with the history with Danton. You know, they give us the preseason games, or they sell them to us at half price, and I just couldn't. The last preseason game I went to was Rob Ray's rookie year, and he fought 4 times before the end of the second. So, trying to make a name for himself with Buffalo, but I just cannot. I can't get into preseason hockey. But I know my friends on the East Coast, and I know they're listening. The Bruins fans and the Rangers fans, they're all planning parade routes because their team won in a shootout in the exhibition season. So that's a little laugh for them. But that's how they are. They, you know, the Bruins went in a shootout in a playoff or preseason game. Oh, got to play in that parade. They were getting that cup. So
I think looking at, you know, Buffalo, Toronto, like you can't read anything into it. I think they're nothing more than a good thing for the coach to look at and maybe get an evaluation. But obviously the season ticks up so much once the actual puck drops.
Right.
But I concern myself with some of these teams' thoughts. Like the guys they're looking at to play certain roles. Man, I don't know whatever happened to you take your best 12, 13, 14 forwards, your best 6, 7, 8 D.
Yep.
They don't do that anymore. There's so many things to consider with Gary's cap and all those reasons. I couldn't stand it having to play, like, you know, cap volleyball with certain players, and it's no good for the game.
It's horrible. It's horrible. So I just had a flashback of Ron Francis's, say that 5 times fast, his rookie season with Hartford. So I remember him in the first one or two exhibition games. My mom took me in, and so they sent him back. I think it was the Sault Ste. Marie. I think was where he played as junior. And he went back, and 4 or 5 weeks into the season, Larry Plow said, "You know what? I need him here," and they brought him back. And his rookie year, he did not play the first 10 or 12 games because the Whalers sent him back, and it wasn't because of any sort of service time or anything like that. It just happened. They sent him back, and
Larry
the
Plow
pre
was he was the GM then.
yeah, he was the GM of the Whalers. He was the first player signed when they went to the WHA. I believe he was the first player signed. And the ironic thing was Larry Plow, because he played for the New England Whalers every season, he wore number 4, and Francis, when he came to the Whalers, his first number was number 4 before he switched to 10. And dimes to donuts, Larry Plow's fingerprints are all over that. It's just I can't. It's he was a. We were talking last show. He was almost like Rick Dudley. He was a great scout, a great admin, a terrific assistant general manager, but his trades left a lot to be desired. He got into a friction heat with Mark Howe during the injured season, and within a year and a half, he traded Mark Howe and really got nothing. I mean, it all boiled down.
That's odd to hear that because Larry
Yeah.
Plow was St. Louis's GM when Mike was there. And
Yep.
I gotta tell you, he treated us awesome.
He was
through the bad stuff. He was really solid.
He was great. Well, he was great with the Rangers. He was the assistant GM when they won the Cup in '94, and he did win a Stanley Cup with Montreal as a player. But it was, when I look at his time in Hartford, it was really the friction with Mark Howe and Larry Plow, and that defined his entire managerial career and coaching career with Hartford. Was that if he got along with Mark Howe, things would have got a little smoother for the Whalers. And you start to look at the players that would have developed around Mark Howe, and it would have been just that much better. But for some reason, Larry Plow just did not get along with the Howes. So Larry's last year in the WHA, the three Howes were there, Gordy, Mark, and Marty, and they signed Andre Lacroix, who was the all-time leading WHA scorer. And Andre wanted Larry Plow's number. And the Howes turned to Larry and said, "Why don't you give him his number?" And maybe that was the start of the waterfall over a jersey number. And that's what I mean by Plow recalling Ron Francis from junior to bring him into Hartford and putting Larry's number on Ron Francis's back. And it's just bizarre on certain things that happen. He hired Larry Kish, who is a minor league coach, and then fired him 59 games into a losing season. I mean, it was a lost cause, and Larry fired him instead of letting him finish out the remaining 21 games at the time. He fired him, and at the end of the summer, or at the end of the season, rather, Larry was gone and Howe was gone. And that's when they brought in the cat, and we all know what happened there.
When did Burke go to Hartford?
So Burke went to Hartford after what I deem is the worst trade in Whaler history, after Eddie Johnson left. So Eddie Johnson was there, I believe, 4 years. And so I'm thinking Burke went there in '93 because the Whalers made it's kind of bizarre. I have to think of Quebec when they drafted Lindros and then made the Lindros trade, because the Nordiques went back to the playoffs and the Whalers went out of the playoffs. So the the Lindros saga was 91, and he was traded in 92. So I think it was 93 is when Burke went in. And he never had a playoff game in Hartford, and he really changed a lot of things with the franchise and tried to fix all of Eddie Johnston's mistakes. But pretty soon the NHL came calling, and Brian took the league job and left Paul Holmgren as coach and GM, and they brought in Pierre Maguire, and oh my gosh, hockey was just not fun for any of those players. And that's when, if you see the comments that Pat Verbeek made, like free agents were not going to sign with Hartford, players didn't want to play for they didn't want to play for Pierre Maguire, and Pierre Maguire burned a bridge in Pittsburgh, and then for some reason he came to Hartford. And the funniest thing is Jaromir Jagr, who I wish was a Leaf today, Jaromir Jagr hopped out of the penalty box in overtime and scored a breakaway goal. And he said that was against Hartford in the Civic Center. And he said that was the biggest goal of my career. Dude, you've won 2 Stanley Cups at the time, and you were on your way to a Hall of Fame legendary career, but he wanted to shove it right up Pierre Maguire's ass so bad on that. I'll never forget. I've never seen a player sprint out of the penalty box on a breakaway. I mean, there was nobody behind him. Nobody. He looked like a running back that left everybody at the 50. There was no catching him on that breakaway. And it was I've never seen him jump around either. He's a young, energetic kid with the Penguins, and he's a young, energetic kid now with Kladno, but I've never seen him jump around like he conquered the almighty. It was unbelievable. But yeah, that was the beginning of the end. That we could do a whole show on the Whalers, but I think the 180 people would listen to that. But it was something. It was something. The greatest. I'm trying to remember the only person to win an NHL award with Hartford was Emile Francis when he was named Executive of the Year. How bad is that? You had Ron Francis, you had Mike Liu, you had legendary players come through the doors there, whether they were at the beginning of their career or the end of their career. I will say this: Brian Burke and Paul Holmgren, they really tried to assemble something with some pride and dignity, and they brought in Brian Propp, which I just thought was the icing on the cake. Boy, you can't get better of a person than Brian Propp, and he scored his 1,000th point in the NHL in a Whaler uniform, and there were other things as well. But Brian's drafts were they were comical. So he didn't draft. Well, back then it was Robert Holik. Now it's Bobby Holik. He didn't draft Holik, but that was one of the first players he traded, and he got Sean Burke in the trade, and he said, "This is going to be our goalie of the future." And it was. I mean, he did pull off some great trades, but I just remember Robert Petrovicki he drafted, and there were a couple of others that like, are you kidding me? The players he left on the table, but I don't know. And then Jimmy Rutherford came in, and that was it. And the governor got involved with $47.5 million, and the next thing you know, they're a hurricane. So that was it.
Jimmy Rutherford.
That was all.
Yeah. That's where I am. I'm out here, and does he ever take a beating?
Oh,
it's like every move.
Yeah.
I turned to my wife and said, "What a move getting Tocchet. The team will at the very least, be disciplined and they'll be structured."
Right.
But Jimmy Rutherford, look, I dealt with Jim Rutherford, and a really firm guy, very straightforward. You know,
Yeah.
no. Hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it? No, just right to the point of whatever you're talking about, and professional dude. But like this whole thing has been a comedy show.
You know, the one thing about Rutherford, I mean, I understand you bring in your own GM, and like we spoke of last show, you know, Davidson brought in William Davidson from the Vipers and the Pistons. You know, when he purchased the Lightning, he brought in Rick Dudley, and when Peter Karmanos purchased the Whalers, ironically enough, they were supposed to get the Lightning, and then Phil Esposito came up with these Japanese ghosts who had the money. But anyway, the bizarre thing is they brought in Jimmy Rutherford, and all of a sudden, and the Whalers had missed the playoffs, and not by a lot, but you know they were close. It was better than what it was in the early '80s, and he started tinkering with the lineup a little bit, and you know the last year the Whalers were there, we knew it was game over at the mall, and excuse me, they went to Carolina. And you know how it is in new markets back then, not like Vegas and Seattle. They were just happy to have a team. The Hurricanes have the best lease out of any team in the United States in the National Hockey League for a club that that does not own their building. They have the best lease of anybody, and so guaranteed sales and tickets and parking they get a piece of, and concessions, the skyboxes, everything, just everything. So there's really no pressure on him. He can just build a team. I think they got lucky when they went to the Cup Finals in 2002 against Detroit, and they got hammered. And they brought back Ron Francis for that, and he wore 10, by the way. And um, you know, they won a cup in in '06, and you know, were they lucky? Were they lucky to win that cup? Were they lucky to beat Edmonton? Maybe Edmonton was on their fourth string goaltender, and um, you know, who knows what would have happened had they lost that. And you know, I think there were two or three players for the Hurricanes. I think that was their end game. I don't think Brindamore played another year. I know Recchi did, and I think that was Doug Waits. No, Doug Waite played a couple more years with the Ducks, but you know they were at the end of their line, and so it was their last chance. But if you look back, he really hasn't. He's got a longevity is one thing, but you know years of mediocrity. And my thing is, when you go to Pittsburgh, you've got Sid the Kid, and you've got Malkin, and then you got the stud in net. Those are the three you got to keep happy. And Letang developed along the way. Um, so, you know, there's your core four, as they say. But you can't build around that. You can't put the pieces together to match another Stanley Cup run. I mean, I know they won a handful in the mid teens, but like that should have been done like quicker. That should have been done a little easier than not. I don't know. They should have, and definitely didn't leave anything in the cupboard, because now Pittsburgh's, you know, 1 through 8 or 1 through 10, they're fine, but there's a huge drop off there. And, you know, that's usually when you see the drop off, it's the poor drafting of the previous GM. And anyway, that's there's my Jim Rutherford rant for the day. I think he's in.
You go up and down the league, you could do that all day, literally.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know. It's
We'll get into it as we go on, but there's some. I got a couple of Mike Milbury doozies.
Mad Mike.
When he was with the Islanders.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. So there was a hot mic. I don't know if you want to talk about this, but there was a hot mic on the floor at the draft. I think it was the 99 draft or the 97 draft. I can't remember which one it was. And Milbury is talking to Brian Burke, and Brian Burke doesn't know that Milbury had just traded Luongo. And Brian said, something like, what are you going to do with Luongo and stuff like that? And Mike turned to him and said, yeah, I traded him. And Brian Burke, you could have knocked him over with a feather. Like he couldn't believe it. Like how he didn't know about it and how he wasn't involved. I have no idea. No idea. But it was unbelievable. Like Burke's face was like shock. Like you just keyed his car with a chisel. Like he just couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't believe it. So I do remember there were a couple of Mad Mike stories, and
I honestly, I loved him as a player.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I still get a kick out of him climbing in the stands in Boston and all that. And I know
in New York, yeah.
a couple of guys that played against him that told me he was fucking scary.
Yeah.
But
well, he was
when he was GM, I felt like you're talking to somebody with ADHD. He used to go nuts. He'd talk about 45 different things, and I'd be like, holy shit. You get off the phone with no answer.
Right. So in Don Cherry's book, now we're referencing Don Cherry's book, everybody's gonna have to go out and get it. But they would carpool to and from the practice rink in Danvers, I think it was, in Boston. And so there's probably 2 or 3 chapters in there of stories about Don and Mike Milbury. And I'll let people read the book, but the funniest thing was Mike was so nervous on TV at the time as a young player. He goes, I think so much of Don Cherry, I made him father of my son instead of saying Godfather. And with that ended the interview. It must have been with Dale Arnold or Fred Cusick, but it was hilarious that he actually, maybe with Johnny Busick, but it was hilarious to hear him say, I made him father of my son. And I don't know how that would have worked, but I will. Now I've got a Whaler Milbury story, and it's hilarious. Well, at least I think so. So Milbury is playing against Kevin Dineen. It's like Kevin Dineen's rookie year, and Milbury doesn't know that Dineen is left-handed, and Dineen really popped him a good one. It was a good shot, knocked him, and so Milbury knew that Kevin learned very quickly that Kevin Dineen was left-handed. And a couple of years later, the Bruins brought in Kluzak, and Mike's coaching the Bruins. And Kluzak has had enough, and he goes and drops the gloves. And Milbury on the bench is waving his arms like an NFL coach trying to call timeout to freeze the kicker. And he's trying to get Gord Kluzak's attention to tell him that Dineen is left-handed, watch the left. And he drilled him. And so out he went. And so it's 1999. Milbury's the GM of the Islanders. And it's opening night, and they're in the Islanders are in Tampa. And I'm in the concourse watching Steve Ludwig's ugly haircut, and he's running laps where the fans come in the building, like on the lower concourse, because Steve Ludwig is all wound up. And I'm like, he passed me 3 times. He's just full of energy. I'm like, should be down talking to your team, but maybe Tortorella was doing that. So the funniest thing is we saw Eric Cairns, and I'm like, hey, Eric, how's it going? And we're talking to him a little bit, and his hand is in a cast. And I go, did Milbury tell you anything? And he goes, and I'm wearing a Whaler hat, and he looks at my Whaler hat and he goes, yeah, Milbury told us that Dineen is left-handed. Like, you got to be kidding me. Dineen's not even in the game. So that's my Whaler story, I guess. I guess I'll be a little nostalgic in this this part of the
I'll
podcast. But
end this off on a good note for you, Chef.
okay.
Connor Timmins with 2 pucks tonight against Buffalo.
Ooh. Wow.
And
Wow.
my Blue Jays are getting dangerously close to being out of it.
What's the score of the Blue Jay game?
They're down 4 Cops, so they're done.
Yep. And they're playing against Cole. So I got to ask you a question about a goaltending situation if you have a minute.
Sure.
What do you think of the Bruins holding on to Ullmark and Swayman? Do you think they should have moved Ullmark during the summer? Because I don't think he'll ever replicate his Vezina Trophy season. And they're paying them both a pretty good chunk of money. What do you think?
I thought Boston, I thought I'd heard from somebody in the summer that said Boston was in love with Hellebuck. And they were going to they were going to rework everything they could to get him. And then nothing ever materialized about him.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, shit, if they get him, even losing Bergeron, that could really solidify it, but it didn't happen, obviously.
Yeah, and I wonder where Hellebuck will go. I mean, he's a Minnesota kid, I think.
It's the salary cap. There'd be a lineup for him in a regular world. I mean, could you imagine him, Toronto, New York? Half a dozen teams he would put them over.
Yep. I honestly think the Devils made a mistake not pulling the trigger on a Hellebuck trade. I really think he would have put him over, and I don't think it would have taken $10 million a year. I think he would have settled for $8 million for a little bit of a longer term. But it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I actually thought Ottawa should have pulled the trigger with Ullmark for Shane Pinto, and it would have given the Bruins a nice second line center while they look for a first liner. And it also could have meant, Shane Pinto could develop into a number one, but he's definitely center blocked in Ottawa. He'll definitely never be number one, never be number two. They've got Norris and Stutzla, or Strudel is what I like to call him. But it's brutal. I don't know why the Bruins held on to him. He'll never replicate what he did this summer. And I've always thought that the Bruins director of player personnel really sold him a poor bill of goods by not evaluating Swayman with more detail and a better understanding, because that kid's a number one and he's being paid $2.5 or $3.5 million to sit at the end of your bench while your starter Ullmark will get a bulk of the games, and he's never going to match what he did last year, ever. It'll never happen, especially with the players that the Bruins lost.
Yeah, they're going to be they have a much weaker roster for 100%. I like Cam Neely, though. I think he's a steady sort of captain for the ship for them.
Go ahead.
I can't help thinking about Mike Milbury coaching Boston now too.
I know, it's like
Milbury got booted off the air for some passive comment he made, right?
Yeah, it was something like, I think it was something with the moms or the women or something like that at the play. It was something with JR, and if ESPN had any brains, or what I really should call them is the 4-letter network, but but if they had any brains, they would have just left Mike and Jeremy alone and just left them and let Keith Jones separate the two of them when they had to. But both of them, they were both just tremendous in the studio. But yeah, I think of Mike Milbury all the time when he was coaching the Bruins, and very passionate. And I can only wonder Can you imagine? I know he was the GM there for a little while. They pushed him out the door, but um, yeah, I look at the Bruins and I think, like, my gosh, they've done everything they can to self-destruct. I don't think they have a first round pick for. I think the next first rounder they have is 2026. With
Hey,
all the trades they've
what
made.
I'd like to do with you, in the next few episodes,
Sure,
before there's too much uh, pavement on the road in the season, I want to get some
sure.
predictions of where it's going to go, because I find
Mm,
a lot of the people that pretend they know the preseason stuff, it's, oh, Toronto's going to win the cup, like that type of stuff. I'd like to get some predictions out of you and me on the air in audio so there's no bullshitting about it later on.
yeah, yeah. Well, I know where this is going because we did a podcast in 20 2011, and I said on the air, I said, what needs to happen is the Ducks and the Kings, because we were doing a Southern California podcast. I don't know if you remember this,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I said they need to trade coaches. Carlisle needs to go up the 405 and kick some ass with the Kings. And Terry Murray, if you remember him,
Yeah.
he needs to come down the 405 and hit the 57 and teach the Ducks the fundamentals of the game because they were severely lacking at that time.
I remember you. I
And
remember that.
yep, and like 2 weeks later, Murray got the boot, and I remember it flashed on my phone, and I started rubbing my hands together. I'm like, it's coming true. And they brought in Daryl Sutter, and that was it. Like, dude, that's what they needed. And you know, I think about Calgary and Daryl Sutter, like he's a hard ass coach, but if you're not a hard ass player, you ain't gonna make it in his system. And there's a reason why Toffoli and Lucic and the rest of those Lewis, all of those former Kings, and I'm missing one of them. There was a defenseman there as well. Like I don't know how you could miss. Like like this is a guy that's a winner. I mean, I hate to say that the family is winners. They are winners. They've won cups, multiple players, and but this guy is a winner. I mean, how could you? Tune him
I
out.
got a lot of good
And
Sutter from Richie, so
yeah, yeah,
more to come on that.
yeah.
So sharpen your pencil. Get your predictions. I'm gonna
I
hold you
got
to it.
those predictions. I love to write those in pencil. I will tell you this. I will tell you that the Anaheim Ducks, the mighty Ducks of Anaheim, they will finish last. They will finish dead last again.
That's bold.
Yep. And they will not win. They will not get the first pick again. Um, and a lot of people think that the draft was fixed, and we can go into that in another thing. But that is, as I look around the NHL landscape, it's the Ducks finishing last. Maybe you want to get a little wishy washy. Maybe Vancouver. Maybe San Jose. Uh, I think the rest of the teams back in the East, they've all really improved. Um, but yeah, those are I believe those are the three worst teams in the National Hockey League, and I believe they're all in the same division. Um, I think Arizona will take a step forward because if you have three dead bodies in the room and you only need to fight two, you know you don't have to worry about the other three that are laying on the ground. And but I think Arizona moved. I think they're in that central. They have to travel longer to play Dallas than Colorado, or there's something they moved somebody. I can't remember. Oh, it's because of Vegas. But yeah, that's my prediction. Those three will be the worst teams in a National Hockey League by far, and it's not even close. So here's my prediction for that, and I know you don't want to now, but the Ducks Canucks, Sharks they will be 3 of the 5 worst teams in the National Hockey League by far, and it's not even funny. But I'll drum up a Eastern Conference playoff format, or at least tell you who's going to win the divisions, and we'll go from there.
And then go
But
to Vegas.
And go to Vegas. So we can end it on this note. I'm half packed and ready to go. I am going to be in Toronto. I'm going to be in Boston, and I'm going to be in Stockholm, all within 20 days to see my beloved Leafs.
Better you than me.
Yeah, it's going to be really cold in Stockholm, and
bring your
from
winter
what
jacket there, sunshine.
Yeah, I'll bring my winter jacket and my Whaler knit hat, which will turn some heads over there for sure, because I know Dean Evison is behind the Minnesota bench, so that'll be a plus.
No
But yeah,
no LHA cutoffs out of Southern
no,
California.
nope, no LHA. I do have a couple LHA jerseys, but yeah, there'll be no flip flops, no shorts, no board shorts. You know. But the podcast will be something else because I'll be freezing my banana off for sure. So
You'll find a nice warm corner with a Tim Hortons knockoff coffee.
yeah, I'm already looking at the cinnamon rolls. They have a cinnamon roll that's the size of a 45 record. If that's for the younger kids, I'm sure. But all right, well, we are wrapping up the second edition of the podcast of Dave Frost in Chef's Kitchen. Remember, kids, to stay hungry and stay in school. And avoid the clap by Jimmy Duggan.